First and foremost, Pokemon is a trading card game. Pokemon's goal is to get as many cards into people's hands to help grow the game. There's a perspective there that as card collectors, that we have to take a step back and say, oh, wait, this is actually a card game. There are tournaments that are hosted around this game. And so there's a lot of decisions that are being made strictly based on the card game aspect of it.
This is GoodSellas, a podcast for collectors who want to learn how to sell the cards they don't want so they can get their hands on the cards they need. In every episode, we uncover the secrets collectors use to move their cards so you can sell more and sell faster. Let's get started.
Hey, this is JB. I'm the CEO of Stack and your host for this episode of GoodSellas. GoodSellas is brought to you by Stack, an app where you can run and launch Stack sales directly from your phone. Using Stack, collectors will claim what they want from your sale, and then Stack will automatically reconcile who claimed what, send out your totals, collect payment, and create the labels so that after a sale, all you have to do is hit print and drop your package at the post office. Stack is set to launch in mid-2023, and for any and all information, visit stacksales.io and subscribe to our mailing list. Sports cards are a lot of what our listeners collect as their mainstay. Baseball, football, whatever. But this podcast is about selling cards, not just sports cards. And I know that I personally get bored with sports if I only do sports. I think this week I bought a 1989 Legend of Zelda sticker card. So, I grew up with lots of other types of cards that I collected outside of just sports, from Magic the Gathering, and I actually played Magic as a kid, to Dragon Ball Z cards, to the most memorable for me and for a lot of people my age, Pokemon. Pokemon is the world's second highest grossing media franchise of all time, behind only Winnie the Pooh. And you guys can correct me if this is factually incorrect. Wikipedia, actually, I thought it was number one. Wikipedia told me otherwise. But if you think about it, Pooh came out in 1924, while Pokemon came out in 1996. And Pooh's at $73 billion gross revenue overall, and Pokemon is 2 behind it at $71 billion. So Pooh got a 70-year head start on Pokemon. So you math whizzes out there can kind of piece that together. But that puts Pokemon ahead of Mickey Mouse, Star Wars, Harry Potter, the MCU. So basically what I'm saying is you should find Winnie the Pooh cards and dump all your money into them. No, seriously, I love Pokemon cards. My highest value card in my collection is my first edition PSA 8 Charizard. Little flex there. It's funny because people know me as an Nats collector, and yet my most valuable card is a Pokemon card. I think that says a lot about the Pokemon card hobby. So what I wanted to do today was bring in 2 of my favorite Pokemon collectors, buyers, sellers, and guys who just know the Pokemon hobby well. We got Trading Card Joe and FTC. Guys, welcome to GoodSellas.
What's up, JB? How we doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Glad to finally get you guys on here. I had to pull a last-second reschedule, which I apologize for, so thanks for being flexible and jumping on.
It happens, bud.
Thanks for having us. Super happy to be here.
Absolutely. So here's where I want to start. There's a massive difference between Pokemon cards and sports cards that I want to address off the break. Modern sports, and you guys, you're probably gonna laugh, and we've all heard it. If you're on Twitter or any sort of social media, modern sports cards go up and down in value based on the play of the players. While we've all heard the saying, Charizard can't tear an ACL. And while that's certainly true, Charizard also can't score a touchdown. I'd almost say that Pokemon is closer to vintage sports cards in that way. So let's just start with how the two of you would define the Pokemon card market.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at it here. I would say that the market is all about print run, availability, and then you get into grading, so you have the population report. I'm sure when you see the first edition Charizard in a PSA 10, it has a huge sale, and then another one popped up in a 10, the second sale was drastically lower. So where Charizard can't score a touchdown, it can become more readily available as people find them in their collections and start to grade them. That's how I would define it. FTC, I'd love to hear your words.
Yeah, I think we tend to look at the Pokemon market as a relatively stable market. However, I think as of recent, we've seen a lot more volatility than I think some people would understand, particularly here recently with this huge boom of Japanese Pokemon cards. There's a huge wave of people that are getting into the Japanese Pokemon cards, and what you're seeing now is just an insane market with Japanese Pokemon cards. As far as modern goes, modern has kind of found its niche, if you will. Like I don't really, or excuse me, a vintage. Vintage is kind of, I won't say cemented, but after 2020 and the big wave came crashing down, I think vintage is relatively stabilized. Whereas modern, there actually is some fluctuating patterns within modern stuff. You could argue that there's, quote unquote market manipulation that's being done with some of these cards. We've seen alt arts that have kind of had a fluctuating price. They go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. So it's actually kind of it's an odd time for the Pokemon market, to be honest with you. Some things, I'd say less things have become predictable within the Pokemon market, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and it really seems like people there's just like randomly things will cause it to go up or down, or these little differences that maybe you don't see as much in sports cards because there's like numbering and stuff. Like I had no idea, and I found out, which was great news to me, by the way, that my Charizard first edition is a fat stamp. Had no idea what that was. Apparently, I was just buying blind and lucked out. I have a fat stamp first edition, where recently I bought a Zapdos first edition, and that is not fat stamp. And actually, when I was talking to someone who was teaching me about this, I thought it was the other way. I thought the one that was the fat stamp actually looked like thinner stamp. I don't know. So it's fascinating to look at the little nuance. And FTC, I've seen some of what you're talking about with the alt arts. Like I saw the Rayquaza from
Evolving Skies.
Thank you. Like take off recently, randomly, which I haven't typically seen a lot in the modern Pokemon market since the boom, where cards will just really take off. So, Joe, what do you think is behind some of that random, probably not random is my guess, explosion in certain cards versus others?
I think we're in a really interesting time to where we're getting ready to start Scarlet and Violet, which is a new era of Pokemon. Sword and Shield is, quote unquote, some people are saying no longer in print, which means that they're no longer printing booster boxes, elite trainer boxes, which are what you get Pokemon cards from. So I think there's a little bit of FOMO going on right now with, they're not printing these sets anymore. These alternate arts, which are the rarest cards you could pull from these sets, it's going to be harder to buy the boxes, so it's going to be harder to open them, which means it's going to be driving the price up. And I think that's, since we're in this interesting change of era from Sword and Shield possibly being out of print all the way to Scarlet and Violet, is why we're seeing these price increases.
And I'm curious about, so for me, this was what got me out of modern Pokemon cards, was the print runs. I personally hated it. I thought that, and for those of you who don't know, and you two can correct me in any place where I misstep, because I'm a little bit more rusty when it comes to the Pokemon market than maybe I was 2-3 years ago. But a big thing for Pokemon was we're going to make our cards available to anyone who wants them. And that scared me out of modern Pokemon, because as someone who grew up in the 90s and watched 90s sports cards crash for the exact same reason, which is print to the moon, get everybody cards, then there's no scarcity, and then nobody wants anything and nothing's worth any money. So that actually scared me away. I didn't like that we were in this era of, well, if people keep buying them off the wall, we're just going to keep printing them. And then I was collecting things like Hidden Fates, which I was trying to build the entire shiny vault of Hidden Fates, and I just keep watching it get re-released. And that's frustrating to me, because I'm like spending money at secondary market prices, and then they print them and then everything falls. So what is your view, as guys who I think dabble in everything Pokemon, and I know a lot of modern stuff, what are your views on their desire to print to the moon, basically?
Well, let me offer like a little bit of perspective on this, because I think, particularly I collect some sports too, so I get where you're coming from, JB, but there's a different aspect from sports to Pokemon. And I think a lot of people lose sight of this, is that Pokemon is a trading card game. It is a game. First and foremost, Pokemon sees this. Yes, they are card collectors. There are people that do nothing and they just want to have the cards for the nostalgia purposes. They like the arts. But first and foremost, Pokemon is a trading card game. Pokemon's goal is to get as many cards into people's hands to help grow the game. Pokemon, when they decide to make print runs and they decide, this set needs printing, it's because there's cards within that set that need to be accessible to players. So, sports doesn't look at that in that aspect. There's no game aspect of the sports. So I think there's a perspective there that as card collectors, that we have to take a step back and say, oh, wait, this is actually a card game. There are tournaments that are hosted around this game. And so there's a lot of decisions that are being made strictly based on the card game aspect of it. And also another thing is, as Pokemon cards modern still have a ton of value to them. I get that the print runs can scare you, but when you look at let's look at Silver Tempest. Silver Tempest has the Lugia V alt art. That's a $200 plus alt art. Now, relative to sports cards, that may not sound like much, but in the realm of Pokemon, for the most recent set, excluding Crown Zenith, to be a $200 plus chase card, that's a very valuable modern card. Lost Origin, the set before that, the Giratina V is a $200 plus chase card. So, I get it, but at the same time, when you really sit and break it down, these modern cards still have a tremendous amount of value to them relative to what the Pokemon market is. There's vintage cards that are less than $200 that you wouldn't think are less than $200. I mean, they're classic, amazing, beautiful, nostalgic cards, but they're not touching a Lugia V alt art, so in terms of value. So, there's modern cards have great value to them. They truly do. And I think, and what's pushing that is the alternate arts. That is definitely where you'll find the value in these cards. Now, again, it's one of these things where Pokemon, they should be printing the heck out of cards. And as someone who's a collector and who's now been playing the TCG and hosting tournaments, I've been streaming it live, going to my local shop that I'm partnered with, playing games. I love it, man. I couldn't be more happy for the fact that, and I want my cards to have value too. I don't want to just have cards that are just meaningless or not, I shouldn't say meaningless, but worthless, because it doesn't matter what hobby you're in as a collector. I think most of us would say we want our collection to have some sort of value to them.
And if you say you don't, then you're lying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. But that being said, we've seen huge print runs of these recent sets.
Yeah.
And truthfully, these chase cards, it really doesn't have that huge of an impact on the chase cards of those sets. They hold their value extremely well.
Yeah. And to add to that, there's you talked about if someone hits a home run or if they're playing really well, their card values go up. The TCG is a game. So recently we saw the Rayquaza Amazing Rare from Vivid Voltage go from $2 a card to $10 to $14 a card pretty much overnight. So bulk buyers like myself, I had 20 of them that I got for $1, and now they're worth $10 to $12. So Rayquaza hit a couple home runs for me. And so the TCG, if you can follow it, you can kind of track what's the meta, what cards are going to be super playable, and then you can find value in these cheap cards.
And that's actually a huge aspect of it too. Let's say, for instance, let's go back to Silver Tempest, which has the Lugia V-Star. V-Star cards are not of value. They're really not. They're usually like a $3 to $5 card, just a generic V-Star card. However, the Lugia V-Star is the meta. It is the meta of the TCG. That is currently an $18 to $20 card, and it's just simply a V-Star card. So the
FTC,
TCG,
can you explain for the audience? I think I know what you're talking about, and even I don't. Can you explain what when you say meta? I believe that's referring to a card that is very powerful in the game, but can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the meta is always evolving within the TCG. When new sets get released, you've got new cards to work with that have new abilities. They all do different damages. So there's a lot you can get extremely creative as a player to combine all these different cards. Now, the beauty of it is it's not always within the most recent set. You can pull cards from a year ago that have synergy with the more recent modern stuff. And so what I mean by the meta is that people will put together these decks, and that deck is currently winning a lot of games. It's winning a lot of tournaments. People are having a tremendous amount of success with it. And so that's what the meta is. You tend to have around really strong meta decks, probably 3 to 5 extremely strong meta decks. You can make other decks very viable. There's other viable decks, but generally speaking, a lot of the players have a 3 to 5 deck rotation in which they will use, because that's just what the current meta is of the game. So,
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm gonna be dead honest here. I've never even piece that together, that cards could fluctuate in value based on their viability in the game, and then that makes them more desirable. And when they come out, people don't know exactly, because these decks, and for the audience, they have cards that play off of other cards. And so you may not know right away when a product releases how these players are going to piece together a deck to make it more powerful. And the only thing that's going to happen with that is it's going to happen over time. I mean, you see it in video games all the time, right? They're always putting patches in video games because some character or something was too powerful and they had to nerf it and bring it back down and elevate other things. But I guess, and you guys can tell me if I'm right here, I mean, once they're out in the market, there's not as much nerfing. So then other more meta cards need to be released to then nerf that card, and then that new card becomes more valuable. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting dynamic I'd never really thought of.
And so that's the beauty of it. So for like Pokemon, you have hard release dates for these sets, right? And then you've got 2 weeks of a pre-release, and that pre-release is done with build and battle decks. And those decks are exactly what they say. They're build-in battles. They're meant for the players. Granted, obviously, as collectors, people want to get their hands on them to get Pokemon cards a little bit early. But that whole pre-release, that 2 weeks of pre-release, is specifically designated for players to come into LCSs, buy build-in battle decks, sit down at the table, and look at the cards, and right there on the spot, construct your deck and start playing around with what's working and what's not working. So before the actual official hard release, there's an idea as to, all right, well, this card has a really strong ability, or when I played this card and during the pre-release, it worked out really well. So by the time the release hits, you've got a pretty decent idea as to what cards in the new set are going to work out well. Now, like going back, what Joe was saying in terms of cards all of a sudden being affected by the TCG, we saw this recently with the Empoleon V alt art in particular, out of Battle Styles. Now, I love Battle Styles. People tend to hate Battle Styles. I love Battle Styles, but I'm a huge Urshifu fan, so that would explain a lot. But Empoleon
also
V
wasn't first set with the alt arts.
It was the first Sword and Shield set with alt arts. So Sun and Moon actually had alt arts. They had in Cosmic Eclipse, Unified Minds. There's 4 sets that had alternate arts back in Sun and Moon, and they were the last 4 sets of Sun and Moon. Kind of similar to what they did with the last 4 sets with Sword and Shield with the trainer galleries.
What was it in Sun and Moon? What were the cards? I'm just curious.
So those were the tag team days. So you've got Blastoise and Piplup. There's alternate arts of that. You've got Alolan Raichu and Raichu that are alternate arts. I've got a whole stack of them right here. I could show you a couple of them.
No, all good. I was trying to remember because I opened.
Yeah, so I want to say there's like 40. I'm just off the top of my head. There's like probably 30 to 40-ish alternate arts back in Sun and Moon, including some promos as well. So alternate arts aren't new to Sword and Shield, but you're right. Battle Styles was the first Sword and Shield set to reintroduce alternate arts. But like Joe was saying, the Empoleon V alt art was like a $30-ish, $35 card, while all of a sudden Empoleon V found like it was a good card to work against the current meta. So again, like Joe was saying, overnight, we saw a spike in like a $35 Empoleon V came up to a $55 Empoleon V card. So to speak towards these old cards, I say old, it's not that old, but it's still considered a modern card.
Yeah.
And the older
vintage Pokemon is like mid to late 90s. So it's a very truncated, old is like, wow, you get something from like 2013. That's like ancient in Pokemon time.
Well, we call that the vintage modern era right there. But like Joe was saying, like the amazing rare Rayquaza out of Vivid Voltage, again, a slightly older set, but that skyrocketed in value because now it has playability within a meta. So, you're right. Pokemon or Pikachu is not going to go out and hit a grand slam in the World Series, but if Pikachu is viable and a strong meta deck, you'll absolutely see the value of that card go up.
Yeah, and then you probably can combine the fact of like, are they a popular Pokemon like Rayquaza, which, is an incredibly popular Pokemon, or an Umbreon or a Mewtwo. And if those are also a meta, I have to imagine that those then become extremely desirable, like we saw with the alternate art Rayquaza. Joe, I have a question for you here, because you and I have, over time, I've had cards that you've had interest in, and we both kind of had a mutual respect that you're like, hey man, like, I'm interested in this. I can't hit your amount that you want for it. And I totally get it on my side, because if we go back to, it's a little bit more difficult for the cards to go up, and it requires things outside of pretty much everyone's control, it sounds like, is when you're buying Pokemon cards to resell them, it is difficult to buy at comps because buyers are buying in an effort to resell, and without having prices necessarily on the horizon of going up, you have to beat margins to make any money. So I'm curious, how do you all go about selling and trying to actually make money back, on those tough and tight margins?
Yeah. So, the first step is defining whatever the comp is, because you have eBay where if you have, let's say, a card in relatively good condition, it goes on auction. Somebody loved that card from their childhood, so they want it. So they'll bid up high and have a high comp. But then if you go to TCG Player, which is more based around the playability of the game and buying bulk cards, the value might be, 20% cheaper than it ended on auction on eBay. So determining the value is the first step, and you can look at eBay and TCG Player, and sometimes they're very different, sometimes they're similar. And then also you have to look, if you're using TCG Player, you have to look at market value versus the listing as well. So TCG Player combines the listing and the sold price to come up with a market value for the card. And on TCG Player, you can put a list of cards together and it'll say $1,000, but the list price might be only $900. So you have to factor in when you're buying that TCG Player is pulling from market value, not sold value. And then that's kind of where you have to start that conversation. So if that's not known by the seller, and then it is known by the buyer, sometimes it can come off just a disagreement from the start and the deal won't happen. So finding really good deals in Pokemon usually is just patience, or you have to buy a ton of cards and buy bulk, which is usually what I do. If I want the good cards, I have to buy a lot of the bad cards that I really don't want or don't sell, and find a creative way to sell those.
Yeah, because I got I would get frustrated at times selling on Twitter my Pokemon, because all of the Pokemon collectors, but more like buyers, and I knew, I knew it. I knew and I learned it as time went on, that, these folks wanted to help me out. They wanted to buy from me, but they're like, dude, I got to have some room on my side, And so it was tough, because I would be like, look, there's 5 comps at $35 for this card. And then it's like, hey man, best I can do is like 25. And you're like, man, that's 30% of the card. But then you have to kind of change your mindset, which is, they're not buying and hoping that this prospect who's in the minors is going to come out and, be the next superstar MVP candidate. Even in these situations, like you're saying, we're talking about cards going from, in the most recent example, I think you said 35 to 55. I mean, we're not talking about 35 to 350 overnight. So, it's really understanding that. And I think it goes into, I've heard that the Pokemon community, card community can be toxic. Every community can. But I've also seen that the Pokemon sellers, at least on Twitter, tend to really get along. Like, you guys seem to have a really good community of understanding that hey, we're all out here trying to get some, in our own ways. But if we work together and kind of be a little bit more understanding that there are these really tight margins that we're all working around, that, you'll be a little bit more successful. And then I ended up becoming a little bit more lenient. I'm like, yeah, man, whatever, I'll take a little bit of a hit, but I can move it quickly on Twitter, and that's easier for me. So curious, FTC, what you've seen there on how you're balancing that margin game on what you're buying versus what you're selling, and how, you're working those two together.
So you hit the nail on the head when you were comparing, the sports to the Pokemon. Pokemon is razor thin margins, right? We're talking expensive card for a Pokemon is like $100 plus card. That's, for a Pokemon buyer, that's a nice little chunk of money. Whereas sports, you could buy a card that you were at a show, you talk someone down like $150 off a comp, right? You can turn right around and make $150, and that's a good margin for you. That margin doesn't exist in Pokemon. You're not going to buy a card and make a $100 margin on a card. So that nickel and diming is kind of the dance you have to play with people. Now, as Joe said, buying bulk is usually the way to go about it. I mean, it's very rare that you're going to find someone that's just going to give you an $80 card for $60, like unless there's some sort of damage that goes along with that.
No, you just find me after I graded at CGC like 250 cards, and I take a massive bath.
That's a CGC 9. Yeah, I'll pay you less than raw for that card.
Please buy this from me.
Right. Well,
but no. In reality, go ahead.
So there's a slightly different dynamic than the sports community when it comes to Pokemon, and that is that people master sets, right? Like and correct me if I'm wrong, JB, I don't think people try and master sets nearly as much as they do with Pokemon, correct?
Correct. So I mean, it was a thing with collecting in, the 70s, 80s, 90s, or even like vintage baseball. People will do it with 50 sets. But nowadays, set collectors are few and far between in the sports card hobby.
And so that's going to be a very large difference between Pokemon and sports. There's actually a lot of people, and even more so these days, that are trying to master sets. And so you'll come across people, and we're all familiar with one another. We see each other on the timeline. We see, oh, this person's working on this set. You put a card up on the timeline, and it's the card that they need for their master set. And so there's this dynamic of like, you know what? And this brings us back to the nostalgia of Pokemon as kids, right? When you're flipping open your binder and you're making these trades as kids. I think trades are like a very big aspect of Pokemon, but also just helping someone else out complete a master set. For me as a seller, if I'm selling a $20 card and someone hits me up and they're like, hey, dude, like this is one of the last cards I need for my master set. Can you do, 18 shipped? And I'm like, not a problem at all. Because there's a part of me as also a collector that it's nice to hear this is going to my master set. This is going to like fulfill something that I'm trying to accomplish. And so there's a dynamic that goes into that sometimes it's not always, and this is going to sound kind of corny or whatnot, but it's not always about the margin so much as it is helping out your fellow collector, because that person's, fingers crossed, they're not going to turn right back around and try and squeeze that maybe extra $3 you could have got out of it, right? They're not going to throw it back on the timeline, which I see a lot. And this is not a knock to sports, but I see it a lot in sports. Someone gets a really good deal, and a week later, that same slab is up on sports for an extra $200, right? You don't really see that going on with Pokemon because people are trying to keep that card in their set. So, and the other aspect is that same person, and like I'm incredibly blessed that people have looked out for me when I'll be like, hey guys, I need this card. It can be worth a nice little, $15, $20 card. And next thing you know, they're like, dude, DM me, send me your mailing info. It's on the way, So there's a very I'm speaking mostly to Twitter because eBay is a different animal altogether. But like within the community of Pokemon, once you've found kind of like your people that you're constantly dealing with on a regular basis, they truly do look out for one another. There's that nostalgia feeling of like, being a kid and taking your card out the binder and be like, yo, dude, I can help you out. Trade me this card, even if the values don't match, that type of aspect of it. But Pokemon is a tricky thing because, again, the margins are really thin. It's just like, it's a nickel and dime kind. And Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but like Pokemon card selling is like a very nickel and dime type of way of going about making a little extra money. It's really hard to find those cards that you're just going to be like, this is a home run. Like, I can make $50, no questions asked, off this one single card. It's a very much like I can make $3 on this card. I can make $5 on this card. I can make 50 cents on this card. So it's the accumulative effect of like, all right, after I've sold 100 Pokemon cards, now I'm up, $100. It's a very much like it's a volume thing, as Joe was alluding to.
Yeah, it's definitely volume. Making 5 to 10 cents on a card selling it bulk is great, but it's just a lot of work to get started in doing that. And to add, there are people mastering sets. So as a seller, it's important to pay attention to people who are mastering sets. So I made a tweet a while back, said, what sets are you collecting? What cards do you need? And there's an app called Pokelector that you can go through and check mark all the cards that you've collected in the set. People will send me screenshots. If I have the cards, I'll get them together so we can bundle shipping. I can give them a good deal. I get to move a lot of cards at once for a good price, still make my margin, and then they get to knock off a bunch of stuff on their set. So you have stack sales on Twitter, which are great, but just kind of getting a network of people that are collectors, you can give them a great deal and they'll keep buying from you. It's a really nice synergy that goes on in the community, which I've seen.
And let me real quick give it a shameless plug real quick, JB, because we did a stream 2 weeks ago and I sent out a tweet. I said, hey, Joe and I are curious, what cards do you need to help complete your modern master set for the more recent stuff? And, we had a ton of replies. People said, I need this, 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 and this. I hopped on my stream. We brought up tradingcardjoe.com, and Joe gave me an allowance to literally buy followers and people in the stream to buy them the cards that they needed to help fill their master set. So again, that just speaks to like this sense of community and, hey, I got your back and I'm helping you, fulfill your collection. And so like, that's a very strong aspect of Pokemon collecting. And shout out to Joe for being one of those people that actually looks out. It's not just about making that extra $5 here, $6 here. It's a very community driven aspect of like, let me get you some cards that you need for your set.
Yeah. And, I think in this hobby, and I'm sure you all have seen me here and there on Twitter with, my being vocal, but I think that people in this hobby, the card hobby in general, have this sense of that they don't control anything. When it came to eBay returns, when it came to the PSA shutdown, when it comes to the quality at Topps or, Panini not filling redemptions. And I constantly go the other direction. And I'm like, no, the more people that speak up, the more that one person, like each person that takes action makes a difference in this hobby. And you saw, people were vocal long enough and eBay made their changes to some of their returns. And, now there's a much smaller return window and it's a lot harder to get returns through. And the reason I bring all of this up is I think that it's the same thing as to what you guys are doing, where you could easily say, like, Joe, you're having no impact on Pokemon overall. But I disagree. I think that every little sense of building community makes that area of card collecting more powerful. Where you see card collecting fail, and this also can go to NFTs as well, which I never got into, but I just observed, which is if you don't build the sense of like, this is important to me, I think that you have a fleeting thing. So when I'm talking about Pokemon, it's like, if you're just there to buy Shining Fates as much as you can, to pull the Charizard, to sell it for more than what you paid for it, that's not really a sustainable model for cards. Like, they're neat, and I personally think it's one of the reasons that NFTs failed is because you didn't have that true I guess they didn't fail in total. I mean, there's still NFTs that are out there that make money for people. But I think in comparison, the reason that they failed in comparison to a Pokemon is that there's this sense of importance to us, right? Like, Pokemon cards are important to me. I don't know why, but they are. They've been around for my whole life. They were important to me as a kid. I remember playing red version and it being the greatest moment of my freaking life when I got a red version and a gold Game Boy Pocket for Christmas. Like, that matters to me, where, I think what you guys are doing is, as individuals, you're investing back in that community. And it's just, I can't, stress it enough how important that sense of community is, more than just making a few dollars on margins.
Right.
Yeah. So, how I look at it is, if somebody buys 10 Pokemon cards from me and they have a bad experience with me, I don't want to turn them away from the hobby and make like a bad light on Pokemon, even though Pokemon Company didn't do anything wrong. They had a bad experience with me. Maybe they're less engaged in the community. And then somebody could have got a free card from them. Like, there's this whole like butterfly effect that can happen. So I think, the sense of building that community, making friends, like FTC and I, we met on Pokemon Twitter. We call each other once a week and just talk about cards and stuff. Like, that would have never happened if he didn't buy 20 Hidden Fates Elite Trainer boxes from me and rip them all and not get one single Charizard.
Did you get a Shining Charizard?
Dude, I did not, my guy.
Yeah, no,
man. I don't even want to talk about Hidden Fates, dude. The amount of money that I put into Hidden Fates and did not get a Shining Charizard, dude, it's actually brutal. It's actually brutal.
I probably was the same boat until I finally pulled my first one, which was probably 20 to 30 ETBs later. And then I pulled a second one shortly after. So I was able to breathe a little bit, but I was
I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it.
Deeply underwater for a long time.
I kind of want to speak to what Joe was saying and what you're saying too, because there's another aspect. Like, so for instance, like Pokemon is extremely community driven. And I think that's what the highlight of this is. Like, to be sustainable, to be someone that is to have that, like a long standing, good standing reputation within the community, is to be for the community, which ironically is what part of FTC means, for the community. And so there's also this.
Did not know that. That's very cool.
Yeah. Well, originally the true originally meaning that I came back like 6 years ago was 5 years ago was father to Carter. But when I created my Pokemon account, it kind of seemed like what relevance would father to Carter have to a Pokemon community? So then it was like, all right, for the community. And it still worked out all right. But so sports is one of these things where like, it's almost like it's a given that you're trying to make money off of sports cards. Not, we've got people that are collectors of sports, obviously, like that. But if anyone's trying to make money off a sports card, no one bats an eye, right? Like, that's just like,
they don't do anything else.
Well, yeah, that's just their thing.
There's no game. They're just pictures that you sell.
Right, exactly. So, but
and trade and whatever.
With Pokemon, like, making money off Pokemon is a very taboo topic. It's a very, like, you have to walk a fine line between, making this, and this is something that I preach a lot, and I'm trying to kind of break the idea that you shouldn't be making money off of Pokemon. And that doesn't mean you go to Walmart and you just run your arm down the shelf and you clear the place out. But it does mean is like, you got to be
Unless there was Hidden Fates in 2020, man. I'm sorry, I was doing it.
Man, you know what? I'm not gonna lie. I've taken a lot of products off the shelves, but
right down the shelf.
What I tend to do is I turn right back around and I help the people out with the community that weren't able to access it. So that's more of an approach that I like to take. However, like, this is an incredibly expensive hobby. Sets are releasing every 3 months. You've got special sets twice a year that release in between there. You're always trying to fill out your sets. This is an insanely expensive hobby. And unless you're just doing extremely well financially, you've got to find ways to make this hobby more affordable. And so I'm trying to kind of like break this idea that you shouldn't be making money off of Pokemon products. Like, you should always, and like, there's a balance to be had, whereas you can help people out and give them a good deal or send them a free card, and you can charge a little bit above, what people expect on a certain thing and make a little bit of money in return. And that's something that I don't think that the Pokemon community doesn't quite see that as an okay or an acceptable behavior a lot of time, which is why, like, and so this is like, I've been preaching more and more about like, hey, grade your cards. Sports community, you don't have to preach to the sports community about grading your cards. Like, it just feels like it's very much ingrained within the sports community. Whereas Pokemon collectors, most of them are really content with just throwing that card in the binder and leaving it there. Whereas, you can send that card off. If you nail a PSA 10, pocket that money and come back and buy it raw and throw that card in your binder and keep that money that you have, that you profited on. So like, like, I'm trying to get people to kind of break free of that, like, oh, you shouldn't be making money on this hobby, or anyone that sells above, what the market is, or even if you're selling at market, if that market price is above retail, if you're selling at market, even then people will be like, oh, this dude's scum. Like, he's over here charging market price and not retail. And so like, there is a fine line. There is a fine line of just like being greedy with it. And, like, you're just in it to make profit. But at the same time, if you're not doing things to help alleviate the cost of this hobby, to me, you're not, unless you can just strictly afford it and it's not an issue, to me, you're not practicing this hobby as efficiently as maybe you should be, The
next thing that I wanted to pivot to is a little bit about where you're doing some of this selling. So, you mentioned buying cards and not relisting them right away, at least, because it sounds like FTC, everything is kind of a faux pas with Pokemon. It's like kind of like, not scary, but it's like you're always concerned you're going to rub somebody the wrong way by selling something that you shouldn't have sold at a price you shouldn't have sold. So where are you guys selling? So TCG Player is a great site for raw Pokemon cards. I don't know how many people know, but Whatnot really started out in cards as Pokemon cards in TCG. eBay, of course. I know you both sell on Twitter, but where are you finding it? And it sounds like, Joe, you have a freaking website, but where are you guys finding it best to actually sell your Pokemon cards?
It depends on the card. So for me, anything under $5, that's really common. So as FTC was saying, like a V-Star, a V-Max, or a V, those sell amazing on my website or TCG Player, because a lot of those cards are very playable. You can grab, 3 of them for your deck for $15. or less, and then you have those cards. Twitter, you can move stuff very quick, just like in the sports card community. Running a stack sale for Pokemon cards, they sell really well. What I'm seeing is a little bit of a change. About a year ago, any card you list, people would grab, VMAX, V, whatever. Now people are starting to get a little bit more focused on what they're collecting, looking for rare vintage stuff, vintage holos in good condition instead of any condition. Sun and Moon era right now is super popular as prices are going up. So yeah, I'd say TCG Player, Twitter, and I don't do a lot of selling for Pokemon on eBay. I found it sells better on TCG Player and Twitter very quickly. eBay, there's a lot more competition, I feel like, and how TCG Player is set up for sellers. I can see what like this card is right here, the Shaman V-Star. If I go in to type it in and sell it, I can see every single price that somebody has listed, and I can be more competitive. As on eBay, good.
Can you talk a little bit about the process for selling on TCG Player? So just to give context, I recently was looking into it and I didn't do anything with it, but I was, and both of you guys know this, I think at this point, I was ripping a bunch of Dragon Ball Super, Realm of the Gods. Yeah. Maybe the biggest pull by my own hands.
That's insane, dude.
In my life. The biggest pull I ever had was, so the top 3 pulls that I ever had were a Luis Robert, Topps Chrome, Superfractor, insert.
Nice.
That was pulled by a friend of mine. So terrible story, actually. Good for me. Felt terrible about it. The dude bought 3 cases of Topps Chrome. We're talking about like 10 G's. And he sold me 2 boxes. And I pulled the $4,000 card out of one of my 2 boxes. So like, and he opened it for me on stream. So I did not pull the card. It was my card.
Right.
But he pulled it. So I didn't pull that card. Number 2 was a Ja Morant Silver Prism. I was opening with some friends, handing out packs, also pulled by a friend of mine. So those 2 cards were in like the mid $3 to $5 grand range. So the Vegeta pulled by my hands on a stream with my buddies who have never really opened cards before, but they watched like Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z growing up. So I was like, hey, I got these cards. You guys want to just like hang out on Discord and I'll open. And I happened to pull a TCG Player, at least Raw says $2,500 card. So it was a great day. It was a great day for me. And I'm really, I want to thank you, FTC, for not coming through with your friend. Because had you, then I don't get the card. So you actually really, really helped me out by not selling anything to me.
I'm just looking out for you, dude. I'm just looking out for you, man.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that.
Sure.
But no, what I wanted to ask, so I had all these, so Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball Super or Dragon Ball Z, whatever, both are a TCG. And so I had these cards and I was trying to potentially sell them on TCG Player. I spent about 30 seconds and then I just kind of lost interest and was like, I'm just going to send the big cards off to auction house and they'll take care of it and I don't have to worry about it. But I'm curious now that I have you both here who probably know quite a bit about TCG Player. What is the process like for becoming a seller on TCG Player? How does it work? Do I send them my cards? Am I listing them myself and then sending them off myself? What does that look like for selling on TCG Player?
Yeah, so you do it all yourself. You sign up as a seller. You start off with a stage 1 seller, which means you can only list 50 cards. Okay, or it might be 100. Once you sell, let's say 15 cards, you ship them off within 2 business days. They get received and you get good feedback and you keep that feedback at 190% or higher. You can go to stage 2, which is 500 cards. Stage 3 is 3,000, then it goes up to unlimited. So the first process is just getting your account signed up for and start listing cards. I would recommend to start with cards that are very liquid, very meta, so they sell so you can move up the selling ladder quickly. Don't just list random cards nobody wants. You're not going to get any eyes on them.
And I'm just taking pictures and posting them to their website and I'm doing shipping from my house, or am I sending them the cards like a ComC?
No pictures. So there's a little bit of like a stigma with TCG Player. You never know what you're going to get because if I grab a card, I type it into TCG Player. They have a bulk listing tool that's in TCG Player selling.
Yeah, I saw that. It was too archaic looking for me. I ran away pretty fast once I saw that.
It's a little outdated. I'm hoping since eBay just bought them, it gets a nice fresh update.
They did. Oh, wow.
Yeah, 230 million, something.
Wow. Congratulations, TCG player.
Yeah, last year, last summer maybe. But you type the card in and it comes up with all the versions of the card. So if it's a non-holo or if it's a holo, reverse holo, they have all the rarities. And then you see the lowest price and the last sold. And you can click the inventory amount, match the last sold, or match the lowest listed, or put in your own price. So
Sounds like the functionality of ComC, but you have the card, because that's kind of the same thing as like you see a bunch listed, you can see the lowest listed, but you do actually have the photos on ComC because they're taken, and that's the 50 cents that you pay. So what are the fees for TCG player?
Yeah, so they're pretty high, especially when so this is the downside of TCG player. If I sell a card for 5 cents and I'm only charging 99-cent shipping, mostly everything is PWE, so no tracking. Orders over 20, you have to put tracking in. But anything, so
under 20 is like, hey, it's going to be reflected on your feedback.
Exactly.
If you're taking someone for $10.
Exactly. So the use case that I saw a lot was I sold a card for 5 cents. It's a 30-cent transaction fee. So I'm at $1.04. I'm getting charged 12.5% on top, plus shipping supplies. I'm either losing money or breaking even if somebody just buys a 5-cent card.
Yeah.
So you have to be extremely strategic on what you're listing to have somebody put together a massive cart of 70 cards so you're not getting burnt on the fees.
Very similar stuff that we're running into right now as we build Stack is looking into those things. Because we also, with Stack, we want to be able to have people selling lower end cards in mass amounts, claim 30 cards in a Stack sale. But what happens when someone claims one 15-cent card?
Right. One, and what the problem is, if somebody gets $21 and I have to send it with tracking, it's $4.50 plus supplies, let's say $5. There's no progressive shipping. It still charges the 99 cents. So right there, I get, $3-4 taken off the top just on shipping because you can't change the shipping on the quantity of stuff they're buying. So it gets pretty tricky and you have to be very strategic. So if you don't have a ton of time and a ton of cards that are very liquid, I would say TCG Player is not worth it because it's a lot and the fees are pretty aggressive.
Yeah, I ran away. Maybe I'll try again at some point, but
I think there's a tremendous amount of value, and maybe it's slightly different for someone like myself who's also a content creator at this point, is that there's a ton of value. Again, this kind of goes back to talking about Pokemon as a community. For me, I sell all my stuff via Twitter. Yes, why JB is making an app to help this out is because Twitter is a lot of work. We all know that. You're going through DMs, you're sending invoices, like there's a lot of back and forth. You got to be organized. It's not the most efficient way to go about it. And so that's just kind of a given. However, you do form that sense of community with people. You start recognizing faces. You start seeing people that have bought from you before. You start developing more relationships. I mean, Joe and I
here today.
Yeah, exactly.
Not even just you two, the three of us. I mean, we've all sold and bought cards from each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's an unspoken for value with selling on Twitter and there's also, I laugh at JB because I've seen you put a tweet up like, oh, this is just engagement farming. You'll not selling, but just like a tweet that like, oh, they're just looking for engagement. However, there is value when you post cards on Twitter for engagement. And for someone that is a content creator also like myself, engagement is a good thing. Every one of my cards are getting likes, they're getting retweets, I'm getting responses. So now my account is getting more access to more people. I'm getting more engagement. And so for me, from that aspect, you're almost and sports accounts do this too. You're building a brand on Twitter. There is a value to that. Now, how much value it is, it's all relative to the person with is this just something you're kind of just doing on the side and that's not really that important to you? Or is this something that you're putting a lot of time, effort, and money into and building that brand within the community it's going to have a lot more value to that. So again, you're not getting hit with eBay fees. If there's an issue, you can DM them directly. They can DM you directly. So I see a lot of value with just selling on Twitter. However, it's to be noted that it is a huge pain in the butt. It can be a huge pain in the butt. There's a lot of work that goes into it. But generally speaking, you're dealing with familiar faces, or at least people that, hey, I can vouch for him, or I know him, or I've seen him around. And the next thing you know, this person that I've sold cards to at a good value is coming back to just buy with me. Or like I said, I'm a content creator. So now that person is like, oh, this dude also streams. Cool. I'm going to go pop into his stream and see what he's doing. Or for trading card, or for Joe's instance, oh, this dude runs a website. I didn't know that. Now I'm going to go visit this dude's website. So there's also these values that you don't see with the price tag with Twitter that I think it needs to be noted as well. Yeah, you're going to work a little bit harder, but there's all these like nuances that actually provide some value to that as well.
And the one thing I want a caveat, and I want to make it clear that I think there is this real delineation with engagement farming that upsets me versus what I see that I actually really commend and like. So the stuff that I like is going to be the kind of stuff that you're talking about that you put out. So let's just compare two, right? So FTC puts out a tweet. This is not a real tweet. I'm making it up. That's like, post your favorite Pokemon card below, right? And he gets 200 responses. But you know what he's doing? He's engaging with the community there. And like, I know that you actually care what these people are posting below, and you're probably going to comment on as many of them as you possibly can and be like, or, you say, what sets are you collecting, right? Looks like engagement farming. But you guys are then going and like interacting with the community based on that. Mm-hmm. That, in my opinion, and I'm not here to gatekeep anybody, but I'm a person and I can like and not like whatever the hell I want to like and not like. The stuff that kind of irks me about engagement farming is post your favorite X below, and I know that person couldn't give two shits about the thing that's posted, and they're only doing it to drive engagement and followers. That annoys me. I have no problem. Look, if you guys like Pokemon, you're engaging with the Pokemon community and driving traffic and engagement and getting people like riled up or talking to each other or whatever, man, in my opinion, that's fun. That's exciting. That's what social media is for. It's the stuff where I'm like, because I'm a passionate card hobby person, it's when I feel like people are taking advantage of the community that we've worked so hard to build. And I'm like, man, you're just having our fellow collectors and people post on your post so that you can get something out of it without giving back. And that is what will irk me with engagement farming. So I didn't mean to slander your name there, JB. No, I didn't mean. I put myself out there for it. Have you ever seen me to not speak my mind? So if I'm not ready to stand beside my words, then I need to stop talking as much as I do.
That's actually like a thing that I find very commendable within the sports community, and it's hilarious to me because like Poke Twitter is a very like. You gotta have to like be on your toes sometimes because the block button comes fast on Poke Twitter. Whereas like I see the sports guys and y'all just go at each other like left and right, back and like y'all are at each other's necks all the time. But you know what? In the like, yeah, he may not be your favorite person on sports Twitter, whatever. But in the end, it's like handshakes and it's just like, you know what, like. It's like I can make fun of you. And it's all generally speaking, it's in good spirit. But that's the community aspect of sports collecting. Y'all can give each other a really hard time, and it cracks me up because I sit back and I just like like actually what comes to mind, and I see this often with our buddy Card Max, and like the stuff that he gets.
Oh, me and Max go back and forth all the time.
It's great hilarious, and like it's literally entertainment for me because like I'm just like reading y'all's threads. I'm like, this is friggin' hilarious.
Yeah, I'll just comment and I'm just like, wrong.
Right. But I know at the end of the day, it's like, it's nothing personal. It's no hard feelings. Like, like y'all aren't going to, like, so I love that.
You got to take a lap.
Right. I
breathe it off a little bit, but yeah.
Right. I love that aspect of sports collecting. Whereas like Pokemon, you got to be slightly more diplomatic. I feel like there's a little bit more like, all right, you can't, I mean, me and Joe do it to one another because we know each other well, but generally speaking, like you kind of have to wear gloves sometimes when it comes to that type of thing. So hats off to the sports community for being able to give each other shit, man.
Yeah, and I think it all just comes back to that sense of community. And like for me, the stuff that frustrates me is when I know that people are there kind of grifting the card community versus really there to help the card community. So, I think that that's for me where the difference is.
And we see the same thing with Pokemon. I will say this, that Pokemon, again, is just so community driven that those people fall off. You know what I mean? And I don't know, like I can't really speak to the sports aspect of it because I see. Oh,
you remember that guy was doing giveaways like non-stop in Pokemon, and it was like the big, like, he's like giving away a case of Hidden Fates ETBs, and I'm like,
Which
Dude,
This is not real. What is
like,
going on here?
we could do a whole nother podcast on giveaways, because Lord, I have the reputation for my stance on giveaways. I've gone over that so many times with the Pokemon community. But yeah, like, it's just one of those things that if people will sniff you out in the Pokemon community, they really will. And like, like I see breakers on sports, and like, you can tell it's just like financially driven. And that's I'm not trying to be a knock on sports or anything like that, but it is strictly financially driven. It's the dollars and the cents. It's the stocks of a card. It's the prospects. Pokemon, it really doesn't allow for that much, to be honest with you. You might be able to do it for a little while but like, generally speaking, that's not what attracts people to Pokemon, is like the dollars and cents of it. That's not, although we are seeing a lot more like invest Pokemon. This is actually, when you're talking about engaging with community, this is actually a tweet that I have in my drafts that I'm curious to get people's feedback on, like this new wave of like investment Pokemon, because we've seen it being a lot more prevalent these days. And it's a very, taboo topic within Pokemon. So
it sounds like engagement farming to me.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Like, hey, Joe.
But he cares. That's the important piece. Is engagement farming, but
this has been me from day one. Have I not put Twitter topics up on my timeline that is like, it's completely separate from like, what cards do you have? Like, that's an important aspect to me when it comes to Pokemon collecting, is talking about like these nuances and these differences that we're seeing within card collecting. And it's not just like, who pulled a Charizard today? It's like, hey, what are your thoughts on this aspect now that we're seeing the climate start to shift? Like, there's a very large, there's the microcosm of collecting, and then, you've got the macro. And I think sometimes we're so focused on like the cards themselves that people need to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the overall culture and the environment surrounding Pokemon collecting. And so that's a very important aspect to me to engage people with, and for people to kind of take notice of, to get their opinions on, and also give my opinion on. Like, that only helps strengthen the community, and they educate me. Like, people look to me and I'm like, guys, there are people that follow me that know 10 times as much about Pokemon cards than I do. So like, for us not to use one another's knowledge, opinions, and so on, and help build and create a topic of discussion around that I feel is healthy, is like, that's what I'm trying to cultivate when I go out there and I ask those type of questions on the timeline.
Yeah, it's always the accounts with like 80 followers and a profile picture of Pikachu that have the most insane collection.
It's insane, dude. It is absolutely insane. Like, I'll make like some kind of comment, and the next thing you know, like you said, it's like a person that has like 15 followers, but dude, they will write me a thread just that is a complete breakdown on the topic. And I'm like, Jesus, dude, like stuff that I had no clue about. But like, those are the people that we need to be elevating. Those are the people that I want to retweet. Those are the people that I want to follow. Those are the people that I try and bring. A big part of what I want to do is like bring people in and lift them up around me that can offer that type of knowledge, that have that type of experience. Those are the people that should be getting 1,000 followers, 2,000, 3,000. Like, those people deserve the attention, as opposed to the person that's like, hey, free Hidden Fates ETB, just retweet and follow, like, no thanks. Let me give this person the microphone and let them get all the followers. Let them get all the spotlight, because these are the people that really enrich the community.
I love it. Yeah, instead of the guy who doesn't know the difference between fat stamp and non. But anyway, guys, this is it.
I do want to. It's actually called thick stamp.
Thick stamp. See, I don't know what I'm talking about.
With two C's.
With 2 C's. All right, guys, this is a good spot to end. I want to give you guys an opportunity to plug the different places you sell or your usernames on different platforms. So, Joe, let's start with you. Where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks for having us on. You can find me at Twitter at Trading Card Joe or at Joseph McLean with 2 N's. And check out my website, tradingcardjoe.com. Adding more inventory every day.
And FTC?
JB, first and foremost, dude, thank you so much for having us on. An absolute blast, man. It's awesome to see someone like yourself who's primarily like in the sports, but like when I see you open DBS and Pokemon and actually have a genuine knowledge of this stuff, like, it's refreshing, because I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of Pokemon collectors have a bad taste in their mouth from sports collectors from the 2020 stuff. When sports got cleared, the next thing to go was all the Pokemon stuff. So I think you're a good bridge between the Pokemon and sports community. So hats off to you for being that type of person that's receptive to that. You can find me on Twitter, FTC_hobby. On Instagram, same thing, FTC_hobby. Instagram's a little bit more risque photos, seductive photos of Pokemon cards. But if that's your thing, join me. And that's a total joke, by the way.
Is it? I've seen some.
I got to get the engagement in, right? That's what it's about.
It's the right platform for it.
Right. I literally joined Instagram like 2 days ago, and I started like surfing the Pokemon stuff. And man, let me tell you, dude, it is it's different. I'm going to put it that way.
I believe it.
I'm also on Twitch. I stream pretty regularly, usually about 2-3 times a week, twitch.tv/FTC_hobby. And I want to give a big shout out to Mothership, which is a local it's a local card shop that I'm partnered with that truly is like a partnership in every sense of the meaning, in the sense that they give me the ability to grow the community from a local aspect. They support me in everything that I do. The owner and I have a beautiful relationship. Like a lot of the things that I'm doing wouldn't be capable if it wasn't for the fact that I'm partnered with them and that they're very receptive to the things and the ideas that I bring to the table. So I just want to give a big shout out to Mothership Games as well.
Awesome. Where can they be found? Website, or where are they located?
Yeah. Mothershipatx.com. Locally, they're in North Austin off of Palmer Lane. So if you happen to be in the area, give them a stop. Just a really cozy, like literally community driven LCS. And that was, like I when I went to go look out for a partner to get with, it wasn't the online aspect is cool. And I love that. But I wanted to feel like we are creating something within a local community, literally just make it something of value. And that's, it's not the biggest, most awesome, like decked out shop with all this stuff. It's a very cozy, small shop, but you just get the feeling that they're in it for the right reasons. They've been there for a long time. I've been going there for over 10 years. There's a lot of history there with them. So huge shout out to them. And like I said, I'm incredibly thankful for everything that they do for me.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming on here with me and spending some time today. It was great having you both on GoodSellas.
Appreciate you, JB.
Thanks, JB.
Thanks for listening to GoodSellas. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow along wherever you get your favorite podcasts. To learn more about the hobby and how to sell your cards faster and easier, visit us at stacksales.io. We'll see you next time.